the way I've defined meaningful, a job or a lifestyle that's meaningful is that it's something that you are good at, it's something that you are passionate about, and it serves the community.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. My guest today has done a lot of thinking and acting with networks of local economies and local people with values that are enduring. His name is Dave Smith.
Hi,
and
Janaea.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Dave is a businessman and entrepreneur and the author of the book, To Be of Use. Tell me, how did you come to, well, I'm going to jump ahead, be of use? That's a really lovely notion. How did that come to be about?
I think that started when I worked for Cesar Chavez for 4 years, and it spoiled me from then on to ever do anything that didn't have something more useful, more meaningful than just a job and a salary. And having that kind of experience with somebody like that and the other people that were around the Farm Workers Union was just unbelievable. I mean, everybody who worked there, I've talked to some people. I met a woman who shared that time with me, and I haven't seen for 30 years, a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about how something like that totally changes your life and makes it different because you've had this experience that you'll never forget.
And you made a huge difference. I mean, Chavez made a huge difference. I mean, that was a transformative time.
Right.
The 60s, 70s.
Right. In the 60s and 70s, of course, were all kinds of upheaval was happening in our culture. Some of it good, some of it bad. But to do something with that much meaning, that you woke up every morning knowing that what you were doing meant something, and nobody else could do what you were doing yourself in that kind of movement and organization. And it was transforming for anybody who worked there. Not so much because of Cesar as a leader, but because of all the people that you were affecting when you were doing what you were doing. And I was in charge of changing the union into a computerized kind of operation, and that was my contribution. But we would, if there was some kind of a political campaign that we had to go work on, I'd take the whole computer department. We just move up to San Francisco and bang on doors and work politically for some kind of measure that was the farm workers needed in order to be successful. So it was an all-encompassing 24-hour-a-day kind of life, and that meaningfulness just, as I said, spoiled me. And from then on, I determined that money would not be what I was interested in, that the money was a side issue, that what I wanted to do was do something that was meaningful no matter what it was. And so from then on, that was my
And what did you
mantra.
do? What else did you do?
Well, after that, some friends of mine and I started a little co-op market in Menlo Park called Briar Patch Cooperative Market, which was another transforming experience because several community groups came together, and you would work 8 hours of a quarter in the store. And so we were all doing it together, and 3 of us co-managed it. And we had, at one time, 350 families on the waiting list wanting to get into this small store on a side road near the freeway in Menlo Park.
And it joined, actually, you had other Briar Patches grew out of that, markets grew out of that.
Another one in Mountain View started, and then one in Grass Valley, which is the lone remaining one.
Yes.
What happened to that Briar Patch after several years, I moved on to start another company. But Silicon Valley kind of exploded, and it was very successful, and people just didn't have time anymore. They were making money like crazy, and they didn't have time, so that 8-hour requirement was just not what they could do anymore. So it closed down in the late 70s, but it was one of those close downs where its life was over. It wasn't a collapse. Everybody got their money back, all the vendors got paid, and it was just shut down.
So it was like a social experiment or a business experiment of sorts.
Right.
And yet planted a seed for other groups. What did you go on to do then?
We started a company called Smith and Hawken, which became fairly successful. I worked there for 8 years.
I remember when it came out, beautifully crafted gardening tools,
right,
which you had to import, which is really interesting.
Right.
Even then, we weren't making good tools
Right.
in our
Well,
own country.
we had some people who had apprenticed with a man named Alan Chadwick at the UC Santa Cruz, who had come there with these tools in his hand and transformed this side of a hill, rocky side of the hill, into this incredible garden. And so many people, students and other people in the community, were attracted to that garden. Some of them became farmers and started moving out into other places, and they needed these tools. The tools that you could find in the hardware store were $10 forks and spades that just broke after 2-3 weeks of using them, because the method that Alan Chadwick taught was double digging, which was going 2 spadefuls deep. And
You
these
need good heavy tools.
That's right,
in
good
California
sturdy
soil
tools.
for that.
So we didn't think there's much of a market, because they're $40 instead of $10. We just
Yes.
thought, how many people are going to buy that?
Right.
Maybe a few farmers, and that's it. But we discovered that people were just fed up with shabby quality stuff, whatever they were buying, and they gravitated toward these tools. Even if they weren't going to use them farming, some of them just put them up above their fireplace. They were so
They're beautiful.
beautiful.
I mean, beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful craftsmanship
Right.
to
Right.
that work.
So this was done for organic farmers and organic gardeners. That's why we created that business, and over time, of course, we had to add other things to it, and over time it became very successful. But unfortunately, it's now it's gone through several different hands, and a year ago it was purchased by Scott's Miracle-Gro, which is the largest pesticide distributor in the U.S., and it's just the very opposite of what we created it for. So I go around telling people to boycott Smith & Hawken because it's owned by a pesticide company. But this kind of thing has happened to other companies like Ben & Jerry's and so forth,
Yes.
where another company makes promises about what they're going to do and what they're not going to do, but then once they have the company, they do with it what they want. And I just think it's, for a company like that, that's a lot of people are turning away from pesticides, they've got to figure out a way to put a halo around their company, and I think that's what they're doing with it. And I
So
have
by
not
buying Smith & Hawken,
Yeah,
that's the little nice, the little plus mark to
Right.
counterbalance all of the damage
right. They
that
can
they're
point
creating.
to and say, well, we own Smith & Hawken. So fortunately, I haven't seen pesticides yet on Smith & Hawken's shelving, but who knows if that's ever going to happen. But
That actually leads to a deeper question for me, is that one of the things that you've mentioned in your book is the hope that the dinosaurs, the corporations that were sort of creating damage in the world, would sort of die out.
Right.
And instead what we have seen in the last 30 years, 20 years, is they're getting bigger, the
Right.
Walmarts of the world, creating even more damage.
Right.
Do you have any hope on the horizon for how that, might turn around, or will it?
yes, it will turn around, because it's all built on cheap energy. Our whole lifestyle, these companies, they're all built on cheap energy. And as soon as the energy keeps climbing in prices, it's inevitable going to happen now. Those companies are dinosaurs. They can't, if bringing products from the other side of the world can only be done with cheap energy. Otherwise, then we as people locally will begin creating our own clothing, our own tools, our own products, because they will no longer be able to justify the pricing that they will have to charge when energy keeps going up to $10 a gallon or whatever. So yes, I have lots of hope. My biggest fear is that the transition will be sudden, and that will cause a lot of pain and suffering. Instead of, if we can look towards that and say, well, it's going to be happening quite quickly, we need to start transitioning now so that we're ready for it when it becomes $10 a gallon and $20 a gallon. When it's $5 a gallon, $4 a gallon, we should be saying, okay, this is it. This is the way it's going to be from now on. What do we do now in our communities to be more localized? Because that's what's going to be forced on us sooner or later.
And it sounds like more sooner than more
Yes,
later.
right.
So what would you, if you were able to orchestrate or suggest what communities might do to become more local, their economies, what would you have communities look at, try? Do you have models that we might experiment with?
Yes, well, it all starts with ourselves. We ourselves have to make that transition before we go out and say, hey, we have a model for it. What are you as a person going to do that models that? What I'm going to do, and what I'm doing, is I bought a hybrid car. If everybody bought hybrid cars, we would need Middle East Middle East oil. So I've done that. I've bought a business locally that I can walk to and back, which is really important to me because I've spent so many years commuting, because I've always wanted to live out in the country, and the companies that I worked for or created were somewhere, in a city. And so I've commuted for many years, an hour each way, which is totally destructive and impossible anymore to do. We're just not going to be able to do that anymore. So that's the second thing I've done, is to buy a business that I can walk to. And the third thing I've done is to join a CSA, which is a farm that is a membership farm that you put the money up front that the farmer uses to grow his plant seeds and grows vegetables, and then you get a basket every week. And I've joined a farm up in Covelo, which is north of us here, run by Gloria and Stephen Decatur, which is a biodynamic horse. They actually farm with horses.
Wow. And
they're solar powered in their farming. And this is the third year that I've been a member of this farm, and the vegetables that they grow biodynamically, I described it recently as sort of each kind of head of broccoli has this kind of halo around it. It is so beautiful, and not only beautiful, it just kind of bursts with energy. And I know when I eat that it's giving me energy also. So those are three things that I've done. And then we need to create organizations that are supportive of the kind of transition that we want to make. Back in the 70s, we had kind of a mini energy crisis, which didn't last very long. But in those days when we created Briar Patch, that was one of the reasons why Briar Patch came into existence, so that people could save money. There was a high unemployment and a lot of people with time on their hands. And so Briar Patch was an answer to that. And the other thing that we created back then was called the Briar Patch Network, which had started in San Francisco. And it was small business people helping each other in ways that were very informal, but they were very practical. First of all, it was kind of a social and emotional support system for people who were doing small businesses. And it was also very practical in the sense that somebody could call up and say, I need a lawyer. Who's the best lawyer around to help me with this? And what bookkeeper do you use? And I need a refrigerator for flowers in my store. Does anybody have one surplus that they...
Fabulous support network.
Right. And I think the most important thing about the Briar Patch Network was it gave people permission to live simply. It was a support network for people living simply. And it was like, okay, it's okay to go down to the Goodwill and buy clothes there. It's okay if you have a low income and drive an old car. It's okay. We're all in this together. And I think that kind of practice back then in the 70s, as short-lived as it was, has for our generation, the 60s generation, which I'm proud to be part of. I don't shrink from that at all, although the media seems to make fun of that generation. We did some really, really wonderful things back then. We passed laws that were for the environment, for women's rights, and just a whole list of them, which has now been gradually chipped away by the culture that we were countering back then, but that's coming back. That experience was kind of a foreshadowing of what we need to do now.
I think that it actually set the seeds so that even though those strands are thin, there's the whole simple living movement that has re-arisen here in the last decade or so. I think the roots tap back to there and even further, of course. So I'm guessing that the work was not in vain.
Right.
It's just going to show up at a different time and with a different need here. We've got to... When I think about this whole culture having less energy, this transition that you're talking about that may be rather sudden, I'm expecting there's going to be a lot of folks sort of desperate or searching for how do we respond to this when you can't do the 1 hour commute.
Well, we're going to be gardening more ourselves, eating out of our front yards. Hopefully we can create farms that are nearby that Covelo is quite a ways away from us, although it's in Mendocino County, and they distribute their vegetables clear down to the Bay Area.
Wow.
We're not going to be able to do that much longer. We're going to have as many people in Mendocino County itself support their farm and create other farms. Gloria and Stephen are very interested in other farms like theirs being around towns like this, and they'll help as much as possible because they think that this is the future.
I think they're going to be right. I think a lot of communities are talking about how we have lots of farming activity, which maybe will turn us back. Well, part of what may happen is with the increase in the oil prices, gasoline prices, is perhaps a recession, perhaps a depression because of the economic changes, with people getting more time on their hands,
right,
which gives us the chance to do the gardening and crafting and so on. In your book, I want to go to your book for a few minutes, To Be of Use. Tell me about what spurred you to create that, and what is it about?
Well, I did this slideshow for a group called Eco Farm, which is down in Monterey County, and they have an annual conference down there, and it's really made up of the original organic farmers who started the movement back in the 60s and 70s, and they're still around, and they're, to me, they're my creative action, what I call creative action heroes, because they model what we could all be. We're certainly not going to be all farmers, but their value system and why they do what they do, working with nature, growing things that are needed by people rather than creating things which are superfluous and doodads and so forth. So they're really great models for us. So I did this slideshow about creative action heroes, and I went through some of our, people like Cesar Chavez and Gandhi and, the Nearings who went back to the land, people like that who were our models back in the 60s and 70s. And I kind of recreated that history and then brought it up to the present time with the small organic farmers, which now, unfortunately, many of them are being put out of business because organics has become so successful that it's now industrial organics. And unless you're doing that on a big scale, you can't survive even as a small farmer, which is unfortunate. So that slideshow was kind of what I wanted to do was just say, look, here are our heroes, and here's the kind of person that we could be if if we really adapted to that value system. So creative action heroes are not just farmers, but they're also small business persons. People have managed to survive, even though these box stores have,
are eating up our landscape.
They're eating up everything. Yeah. And the only way small business people, I think, now can make it is to just forget about them and say, I'm not in the commodity business. I'm going to be of service. I'm going to be I'm going to be useful to my community, and I'm going to serve that community, and I'm going to create something that is a hole in my community that is not being served, and do that to the best of my ability. And so I think more and more the big box stores, as they fade into the past, people can begin going back to creating, the small bakeries, the small clothing businesses, all these services.
We're going to need those. I mean, if we're not getting cheap goods from China and India, we're going to have to learn how to make the good hand tools here. Right.
And that's what's meaningful. The way I've defined meaningful, a job or a lifestyle that's meaningful is that it's something that you are good at, it's something that you are passionate about, and it serves the community in some way. That is meaningful in the sense that it's not something that is superfluous, it's something that's really needed. And if you're able to do that, I think it's meaningful work. I don't think we can tell an individual that they're doing something meaningful or not. That's really self-defined. It's totally inside. Yeah. Another thing I talk about in the book is the difference between values and virtues. That you kind of think of them as very similar, but actually values are what is imposed on us when we are born into a family that has a certain religion, into a culture that has a certain economics. And the values are kind of, these are our values. This is what you're born into. The 10 Commandments are values that are given to us that we at some point either accept and say, yes, that's the way I'm going to live my life, or we reject and say, I need a different set of values. That's not who I am. Virtues are our character traits. They're from inside of us, and we have to match up what our personal virtues are. Courage is a virtue, and somehow match that up with either the values that have been given to us or that we create ourselves. And if you Google values, you'll see hundreds of values and virtues that are out there that you can choose. And so, by looking at creative action heroes, somebody you admire and say, I want to be sort of like that. you can say, well, now what are their virtues? Who are they inside? And how can I be true to myself like they are? And if we also stop judging others, our neighbors, people in another culture on the other side of the world, by their values, by their religion, by their values, and started judging them by their virtues, we'd find a whole different person there.
So what are those virtues that you kind of outlined that,
well, the ones
that matter to you here?
Well, the ones that I use were ones that I grew up with, the seven virtues of Christianity, but I decided to give them a little bit different definition. So faith, hope, justice, temperance, prudence, courage, and love are the seven virtues that many of us grew up with in the Christian religion. But instead of, say, faith in God, because some people don't believe in God, faith in our community, faith in our fellow neighbors, that kind of faith in each other rather than, you know, faith in God is fine. It's just that we need to depend more on each other rather than some future that we have a future that's coming at us full blast, and we've got to adapt to that. And I think if we decide that, well, you know, if this all happens and everything bad happens, somebody's going to take care of it, or we're going to go to heaven, or this, instead of saying, you know, I'm here now, I've got to do something myself to live with whatever is coming and to deal with that.
So you're framing those virtues into
community,
our participation in community.
Right.
So how does something like temperance or prudence manifest?
Temperance and prudence are not words that anybody uses them anymore.
I mean, you got to dust those off.
That's right.
What is
well, temperance is knowing when enough is enough. And
that's a big factor in a culture that says consume, 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 consume.
Right.
That's the other side of that.
Right.
Enough.
Right. And prudence is to be wise about decisions that you make. And we're just a go-go society. We're just, you know, get big, get fat, get big fast, you know, all of that. Instead of, I know a lot of small businesses that they don't grow very fast or very much at all. And the people are just very happy in the business. Diamond Organics, which is a company I've worked with for many years, and they have big dreams. They want to have, they ship organic produce to customers all over the United States. You call up before noon and you'll have it there the next day. Of course, that's, you know, shipping produce to the East Coast by air is not a very...
it's not going to be a long-term business model there.
So their model is to have these distribution centers all over the country. But, you know, they've been doing this for 12 years, and they still just have their one distribution business because they've had to grow slow because they're undercapitalized and so forth. And another great model for small businesses is that they sell stock to their customers through what's called direct public offerings. And this allows you to grow on a really sustainable basis, and your customers love what you do, so they'll invest. They will invest in you.
We only have about 4 minutes left, but tell me a little bit about, I haven't heard about direct
public offerings.
How does that work?
It was started by a guy named Drew Fields several years ago, and he created the laws and got them passed in California, and now they're in other areas where if you have a group of customers that you want to sell stock to, you can do that without going through all the costs and registrations that you have to be a public company. You can just do it with your own customers, and it's very cheap. You can do it within a week. You can start doing it within a week. If you Google direct public offerings, anybody who wants to look that up, they'll find Drew Field or another lawyer that's doing that kind of work. So
that's a way to get local investment.
Absolutely.
For our small businesses.
And I think our biggest problem right now is Wall Street. It's non-locally oriented companies, investors who their only purpose is to grow their money, rightfully so. I mean, it's our responsibility. We're investing in these companies, and we want a company that will grow our money so that our kids can go to college, so that we can retire. But there's nothing else about the company that we care about other than grow my money. So the CEOs, that's what he does. And then we're upset because they're not a green company or whatever, but that's a conflict. So it comes out of not being locally owned because the community can't see a company and what they're doing.
So there's not an accountability back to well, you've got absentee ownership.
Right, absentee ownership.
And
that's
so the consequences are not felt by those distant owners.
Right. So locally owned business, I think, is very important. and that people invest, who have money to invest, they invest locally instead of investing into a public company that they don't know where they are, they don't know who the people are getting the money are, and so forth.
So in that model, what kind of return or what kind of responsibility does the business have if they make a direct
it's got to be a prudent return, a temperate return. It's not going to be 30, 40, 50% a year like the venture capitalists like to invest in. It's going to be 5% a year or 10% a year.
So what you're basically, which is fine, which is you're basically saying to those you're investing in is, I'm trusting that you're going to manage your business well, grow it at some modest rate so that I'll get this return.
Right.
Which might even come back in terms of, if I'm a customer,
right,
it could be discounts on the stock that whatever I'm buying from you, and so
which
on.
Diamond does. They do that.
Because I would imagine that we're going to have to transform what we do with our currencies as well, so that they're local.
Local currencies, right, which have worked fairly well in a few communities, but it's going to be something we're going to have to learn very quickly, and that's not an easy thing. You've got to know economics. You've got to know money. I think we have to get people from that industry to say, how do we do this? How do we? I don't know how to do it. Yeah. There are books out, but it's a really touchy, and it's something that you really need to know what the benefits are, what the downside is, and insure against it. So
I've heard it's like this isn't a done deal yet. There's a lot of spade work yet to be done.
And we can invest also through democratic organizations like credit unions or democracies, co-ops are democracies. We can be involved with those on a local basis. We have a great one here in Ukiah. It's a wonderful little co-op store. It's all organic produce, for instance. They don't sell anything that's not organic. So those kinds of investments in democracy in the community, economic democracy, not just political democracy, are very important in this transition ahead.
We have 1 minute left. Got any gems of wisdom you want to just share from all your learning? Wonderful learning.
Be local. That's what I've learned, that we need to be local, and the sooner the better. And I think the communities that take this up as a cause, as something that's meaningful to the community, the better off the communities will be down the road in a year, 5 years, 10 years. But we have to start now. And there are a lot of little organizations around Mendocino County that are taking that on now, and we're really lucky. And if we do that, I think we're going to be fine.
I think that's a good piece of wisdom for a lot of communities, to find what you have is the resources, both people and natural, to come back in and work with your communities.
Right.
Well, we're looking for you for a model. Thank you for that, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
This is Janaina Donaldson, and you've been watching Peak Moment, Community Responses to a Changing Energy Future. Join us next time.